Imagine this. You're on call for a critical trading platform, and suddenly, boom, orders stop executing. The phones light up, millions of dollars are on the line. What do? Now imagine that same chaos, but 2,500 feet in the air. That's what happened last night in DC. And just like in fintech, the response was not luck, it was process. Because just like in financial technology, failure is not an option. Before we begin, I'd like to offer my condolences to any of the family members who lost someone last night. Let's begin. So what we're doing here is we're laying out an ITIL type of response to the crash yesterday to demonstrate the power of these techniques and to show that it doesn't really matter that much what you're troubleshooting, because these fundamental principles are very powerful. So yesterday there was a crash between a helicopter and an American Airlines flight. From the perspective of the way things would happen in the financial world, the very first thing would be obviously incident detection. So a key tool that you're going to be utilizing is going to be some form of monitoring. You have some kind of monitoring software, some kind of a dashboard. You've got email alerts. Sometimes, unfortunately, you might actually get alerts directly from your client. So you have traders contacting you. So in the scope of what happened yesterday, obviously you would have air traffic control would represent sort of like your command center where you have all of your trade support people. And the way that they monitor their dashboard, for us, we use like Genios, for example, that's a monitoring tool. They have radar scopes, right? So that's how they're able to look at what's happening in terms of the aircraft, right? So one of the first things that would have happened is they have advanced collision avoidance systems. So I can imagine an air traffic controller operator might have an alert on their screen. So all the aircraft flying nearby, especially commercial, military is a little different, would have devices that sort of let you know where they are, what their speed is, what their heading is. So algorithms, they can be able to detect a potential collision course. You have two aircraft on a similar altitude, and based on their flight vectors, so the direction of travel, there is a certain probability of a potential impact or a high risk of an impact. So there might be alert levels that they have, just like you might have with Genios, where there's like a low level alert, which is kind of like a warning. You know, maybe you have high CPU usage in a server. So you have kind of like a soft warning that the server is kind of high. And then you can set thresholds. Genios, again, for example, is a tool that does allow you to do that, where you can have a high alert level where, you know, if you have a CPU for a server that's at like 99% or something, you know, that's a big deal. And you want to know, you want the loudest noise, the loudest alerts, the biggest red lights flashing at you. But if it's something where it's just kind of high, but not crazy, so you can set the levels of alerts. I'm sure they have something like that with air traffic control, where there's different alert levels. So one alert level is to kind of like, hey, these two aircraft are kind of getting in the same area. There's nothing too concerning, but pay attention, right? One of the first things we notice is that we look at the air traffic control report, and they indicated that they identified that this Black Hawk helicopter was heading in a direction where it was kind of getting close to this American Airlines flight. So they reached out to the helicopter and tried to say, hey guys, do you see that jet, right? Do you see what's going on? So this, I think, represents a ideal scenario in terms of the way that you want to support whatever system it is that you're supporting is you want to be proactive. You want to be very aware of what's happening with your system. And therefore, you want to be early to recognize a potential problem before it occurs. Unfortunately, yesterday, the first radio communication that I'm aware of happened about 30 seconds before the impact at the approximate speed that they were going, and that speed would be relative to both aircraft. So just a rough estimate, they could have been going 200 to 300 knots because you're going to combine airspeed, right? If I'm traveling at 100 miles per hour, you're traveling at 100 miles per hour, and if we're heading directly at each other, then it's a combined 200 mile per hour in terms of our approach speed or how quickly we're closing on each other, right? So based on things like that, in 30 seconds, they could have covered 2 to 3 miles. So to give you kind of an idea of how serious that is, 30 seconds is a lot of time at those kinds of speeds. But one of the first things, again, is the incident detection. So some kind of alert. And once the actual crash occurred, so imagine, you know, the server goes down, the market data feed goes down. Now you're moving to phase 2, triage and categorize, or setting a category. You want to set a category for how major of an incident this is. Now, in the scope of what happened yesterday, obviously, you're talking about an aircraft that actually crashed. Unfortunately, a lot of lives were lost yesterday. There's 2 aircraft that went down. That would be probably one of the highest levels in terms of alert levels. This is a major incident. So, you know, going back to ITIL, you're going to have your incident levels, right? Based on the incident level, your reaction protocol or response protocol is going to deviate. The higher the level of the incident, the higher the response, right? How loud are you? If it's a really low level, then your communications are on the lowest level, right? I'm not going to be notifying a whole bunch of people. And as the levels get higher and higher, who I reach out to gets bigger and bigger. Is the entire trading desk down? I'm notifying the entire desk. Is it just one trader, right? So you got to categorize. So in this incident, you have a crash that just happened. So risk levels are very high, severity levels are very high, and you need to start initiating your response, right? So you're going to log this incident right away, log the incident. A crash has occurred, all the details you have. What are the aircraft that crashed, the aircraft identifiers, the time of the incident, and then immediately you're going to want to set up some kind of a conference bridge, right? You want to get on a call with all of the relevant players. And in parallel, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be sending out notifications. So in this case, I'm an Air Force veteran, but I don't have any experience with air traffic control. But I would presume, just off the top of my head, for example, I would want to obviously notify multiple management people. And this would be happening in parallel within the military, within American Airlines, within the air traffic control. So all of these various groups, all of these various organizations would be doing the same kind of thing at the same time, right? So if we go with air traffic control, for example, I'm going to want to notify whoever the supervisor is. Who's the supervisor at that point in time when the crash occurred, right? That supervisor is going to definitely want to notify their manager, right? By notifying their manager, if it needs to go higher, and it probably does, that's the manager's responsibility. They're going to go higher. But you, as the person who, you're the operator when this happened, you need to notify your supervisor immediately. You need to notify services right away. I can imagine if we're talking from American Airlines perspective, they're going to want to notify public relations supervisor, because obviously the press is going to want to have a statement and all this kind of stuff. So public relations needs to get involved right away. Legal needs to get involved right away. Someone from American Airlines is probably going to be reaching out to air traffic control for some kind of information sharing, perhaps. At some point in time, there might be a sort of an inter-conference bridge after each one of these organizations does their own individual conference bridge. Bridges were probably going on in parallel. There could have been there's one at American Airlines going on at the same time that air traffic control has one going on, same time the military has one that's going on. And at some point in time, designated leaders from each one of these organizations might set up a inter-organizational conference bridge. So you might have a high-level person from American Airlines and a high-level military person and a high-level person from air traffic control on a call, information sharing, right? What do you know? What happened? When? And at the same time, they might be taking bits and pieces of information and relaying it to their internal conference calls. And that's the kind of thing I would assume is going on. Obviously, there's a protocol whenever a crash happens, shutting that, canceling all flights, grounding flights, redirecting flights. So in the scope of fintech, we talk about routing away, right? You have an exchange that's down, you send out a notification to route away. New York Stock Exchange is down, route your orders to a different venue, right? You want to talk about backup, right? Can you recover from your backup? What's your failover procedure, right? You have the primary server that goes down. Do you have an automatic failover to backup? Is it a manual failover process? How do we get the systems back up and running? Unfortunately, scope of a crash, there is no getting the aircraft back up and running in this case, not in this kind of scenario anyway. Same thing with the helicopter, but what they would be getting up and running would be the airport itself, because they would have shut down operations due to the incident. So there's a protocol in terms of how that actually happens. And as far as notifications, another thing I could think that air traffic control would want to do is send out notifications to all of the closest air traffic controls from airports nearby. So you want all the local airports to know that there was an incident happening at this airport, so if they have flights that are inbound to your airport, they know already ahead of time. There's probably some kind of notification system as well that maybe the air traffic controller can actually do, where on his computer he puts out an alert and any aircraft within a certain perimeter gets a notification. So if you're in an aircraft, you're a pilot, you're in an aircraft heading for Washington, you immediately get a notification that there's been an incident there. So you're able to divert and go somewhere else, or come up with some kind of a plan. You're not just flying blindly into a complete mess. There might be another airport that you could go to. So communications is a big part of your incident response. You want to do your failover process. You want to do it as quickly as possible. You want to follow your protocol. You want to stay calm. You want to document everything that's happening, what's being done. And if you're the person that recognizes first, it's critical that you track this information as much as possible, because when other people get involved, you have subject matter experts are going to get involved and they're going to be talking to you. You need to be very, very clear and precise about what you're saying. You can't go to these people and say at 8 o'clock this and this happened, and then somebody else says no, it was 8:15, and then it's like back and forth. You got to be sure that what you're saying is accurate. If you're saying something you're not sure about, you need to be very clear about that. You don't want to be spreading misinformation. You don't want to mislead your colleagues and introduce delays and make things even worse than they already are. So number 3 is data gathering. So this is the troubleshooting. A lot of this is the troubleshooting, right? What happened? Why did it happen? And when? Everything is about time in trading, right? And the same thing would apply to an incident like this. A critical detail is what happened when, right? So on the bottom here, you see we have our timeline. These are not exact times. We're really focused on ITIL concepts, not the actual crash itself. So some of these details are not going to be 100% accurate. Just keep that in mind. So 6:38 p.m. Alpha departure. So I have a designation. So Jet A, so that's Alpha, Helo B or helicopter, Bravo, and ATC being the air traffic control. So Alpha departure, that's the jet departing at 6:38 p.m. Bravo departure, 8:50 p.m. That's the helicopter departing, really close to the crash time. And then we see over here, 30 seconds prior to the crash, we have a notification coming from air traffic control asking the jet, or the helicopter rather, do you see that jet in front of you? No response from the helicopter. Just before the crash, they reached out again. There was no response once again. And then you have the crash, I believe is a little bit before 9 p.m. So in doing your data gathering, doing your analysis, you're going to want to know, and this is no different than in a fintech scenario, what happened when relative to the element, the specific element. So if air traffic control, you have Bravo, that's the helicopter, Alpha, that is the jet, right? All of these elements have separate timelines, right? There were things happening with each one of these elements at different times, sometimes at the same time. Obviously, the impact would have been a time that it is matching for both the helicopter and the jet. They crashed at the same time, obviously. Air traffic control has logs, right? And logs are a big part of whenever you're troubleshooting, whenever you have an incident. That is how you can really investigate and figure out what happened, right? So air traffic control, they probably have logs for their radar, right? When it sees an aircraft, the aircraft identifier is there. It's probably a record of the exact position, the altitude and speed of everything that's on there. Any alerts that were triggered, they must have an alert system. So the alert system, whenever it had certain alerts, maybe soft alerts, hard alerts, hey, pay attention to this. This looks bad, so higher level of alert. There's got to be logs on that. We want to know at what point in time were the first alerts registered by the system. And then we want to examine what the protocol is. So was there an alert on this system that was ignored by the air traffic control operator, creating a delay in terms of response? Or did they follow the protocol? Do we see the soft alert happening, and then we check the communication log on air traffic control, and we see shortly after, we see them reaching out and saying, hey, helicopter, do you see this jet? Then we're like, okay, they're following the protocol. This air traffic controller couldn't have known prior to this alert, right? So this isn't the source of the problem if that's what we see. But if we see an alert that goes off, a soft alert, and there's a protocol that you should do something, and we don't see any logs indicating anything was done, we don't see the air traffic controller, no communication logs saying that they reached out or tried to reach out. We don't see them, maybe they're supposed to activate something that wasn't activated. We just see a soft alert, no response to the soft alert. So we're like, okay, soft alert was ignored. And all this goes into your postmortem, which is the last element we didn't get into yet. So you're going to create a postmortem report of exactly what happened, and that's going to all be in there, right? The soft alert came, the protocol was not followed, right? Introducing a delay of a minute or 2 minutes where nothing was done, right? You look at the logs for Bravo and Alpha, helicopter and jet. Were there any instructions given to either of these pilots that was not followed or was not followed appropriately? So we look at communication between air traffic control, where they said, hey, jet, I want you to go to this altitude. I want you to be at this speed. Was there compliance, right? We see the request from the air traffic control. Do we see compliance from the jet? Do we see compliance from the helicopter? Was there any time where there was a deviation? Instructions given, instructions not followed, right? If we find that, we add that to our notes. We were breaking this down. We're figuring out exactly what happened, when did it happen, and how did it happen? Who was doing what when? Why did this happen? How did this happen? We got to break it down step by step, right? So in my troubleshooting, if I were troubleshooting this incident, this is what I would be looking at. So we have our 3 elements. We have our 2 aircraft, and we have our air traffic control. In parallel, I'm going to want to know the flight vector and profile, right? So, what was the direction of travel? What was the altitude? What was the aircraft's orientation, right? Where were they headed? This is the kind of information I'm going to want for both of these aircraft. And I'm going to want everything is, again, time. It's all about time. When was what happening, right? I want telemetry. In the context of fintech, that would be like parameters. So, someone has an issue with an algorithm. What parameters do they have set? Right? Traders having issues with an order that he sent out or something weird happened. I want to look at the application logs. I want to see what mode was active. What did the trader click on? What did he actually do? Step by step. I can see in the logs, trader clicked on this, trader entered this, trader made, activated this mode, he deactivated the whatever mode, and because of that, whatever. Extrapolate from that, right? So I want telemetry. I want parameters of both aircraft. So basically, any details, any technical details about parameters on the aircraft, fuel flow, temperature, right? What was the atmospheric readings in the aircraft? I would actually want that as well with air traffic control. I would assume that they would have, for example, a weather report. That's something I'd want to know. What were the conditions? What was the air temperature? What was humidity? These are all factors that affect flight. These are all factors that affect instrumentation. The aircraft has all kinds of instruments or sensors, right? We have what we call AOA sensor, angle of attack sensor. If you look at an F-16 jet fighter, if I remember correctly, you got the pitot tube in the front. That's that kind of antenna in the nose, which I think is like airspeed or something like that. And then you have the AOA sensors, which they're like cones on the side of the cockpit, and that's going to give you your angle of attack, right? So what the aircraft is doing. This is an orientation telemetry. So the next thing is mission. I want to know what the mission was. What was the jet doing? What was the helicopter doing? Were they landing? Were they taking off? Where were they coming from? What were they actually doing at that particular moment? Was the jet trying to do some kind of a change? They were coming in for a landing, and then they determined that they were too high or too fast, and they requested to reroute or to come back around or something like that. What was actually happening? So if I were to be able to get into the mind of the pilot at a time in our time log, right? At this moment in time, what were they doing? What were they up to? What was the mission of both of these pilots? What was the mission of the air traffic control? Was the air traffic control working specifically with the jet, trying to get the jet to do a certain thing? And how was that going? Were there any communication issues? Were there any compliance issues in terms of, not compliance like in finance, but compliance in terms of, I told the jet to do this and the jet didn't do it, or the jet took too long? What was going on? What was the mission of the air traffic control, the helicopter, and the jet pilots? The next thing I want to know is crew. Who was flying the helicopter? Who was flying the jet? And who was the primary person in the air traffic control? Who are these people? What's their experience level? How do their records look? Does this air traffic controller have a lot of issues on their record, not following instructions or safety incidents? Do we have the same thing with the helicopter operator? Do we have the same thing with the jet operator? Is there anything problematic in their past? What is their skill level, and what is their track record of performance? Are there any problem people in here, and is that relevant to what happened? Because just because maybe this air traffic controller has been problematic in not following their procedures or whatever, that doesn't mean that's the case here. The air traffic controller could be the worst air traffic controller ever, but did everything perfectly. However, it's a data point, right? We want to get as much information as possible. We want an area of focus, right? So many things could have caused this. Weather, pilot error, the jet pilot error, pilot error with a jet or helicopter, air traffic control, equipment failure, so many things. We don't want to be all over the place looking at this, looking at that. We want to look at all the details that we have, and we want to theorize, some areas of focus. Like, based on everything I've heard so far, if I were on the team that is troubleshooting the crash, the area of focus, so this is what I would focus on. First of all, what are we eliminating? The weather was clear, so we can eliminate it's probably not weather. Although, even though it could be an equipment issue, I see no data, there's no evidence that there was anything wrong with equipment. No evidence that there was any equipment issues. So, because we would definitely want to do an analysis of all of the equipment, I put that on the back burner. So it's not completely eliminated, but it's not an area that I want to focus on right now. Then I want to look at, was there anything strange happening? Was there any, like we said, was there any issues happening? Any, I told him to do this and he's not doing it, that kind of stuff going on. And once I'm finished doing that initial analysis, based on what I've heard so far, my area of focus would be air traffic control. I would theorize that air traffic control did not notice this potential collision early enough, because the fact that they only radioed 30 seconds before the crash is concerning to me. It could be justified, but that would be something I would want to immediately investigate. I also would want to focus on the helicopter. The helicopter did not respond to the air traffic control calls. Why? Were they on the correct frequency? When an aircraft approaches an airport, they're supposed to switch to the frequency at some point in time. There's a procedure in when you do this, but you're supposed to switch to the frequency of the air traffic controller, right? So you can communicate with them. Obviously, you'd want to do this long before you actually get to the airport, because you need to formally enter what we call their airspace, right? I'm entering into an airspace that is controlled by this air traffic controller, right? So I need to make my presence known. I want to reach out to air traffic control. This is flight, 56 Bravo 26 entering your airspace. I'm intending to land, or I want to land, or requesting clearance requesting clearance to land, right? Or whatever it is, right? So formally, you introduce yourself, you're on the board. Now they're tracking you, and there's some kind of mission. You want to land. I'm assigning you to land on this particular airport. So I want to know, did air traffic control, did they recognize the issue early enough? Could they have recognized it early? Did they follow the procedures? Did they follow their protocol? Was there any problems with air traffic control? The next thing is this helicopter. Why didn't they respond? Were they on the right frequency? Did they get stepped on? Stepping on is something we have where we have a clash, and I guess it is a similar concept with database, where you have something, or even file access, right? You have a file that's locked, so two people are trying to access a file at the same time. The first person that gets to it kind of locks the file, so the second person gets denied. So air traffic control is trying to reach out to the helicopter. So they're like, hey, helicopter, what are you doing? At the same time, another aircraft somewhere else wants to do exactly what we just talked about. They want to reach out to air traffic control to request clearance to land. The person who requested clearance to land starts their transmission before air traffic control, and based on environmental factors or whatever it is, their signal is stronger or whatever it is, they dominate, they get the lock on the communication. So when air traffic tries to communicate, it's too late. This guy's already transmitting, right? So the helicopter doesn't hear air traffic control. The helicopter hears the other aircraft talking. That could happen. That could have been what happened. So the helicopter may have never heard it. Or, the helicopter could have been following their protocol, which one of the key things about flying an aircraft is to fly the aircraft. Sounds kind of obvious, but what I mean by that is, in a situation where air traffic control reaches out to you and says, hey, do you see this jet? And then you look, and all of a sudden you see this jet, and you realize this is a potential crash. Your priority is not to report back to air traffic control. Your priority is not to crash, right? So the instant thing that I'm doing as a helicopter pilot is I'm doing evasive maneuvers to not crash, right? Once I have things under control and I've avoided a crash, then I can reach out and, hey, I saw that we avoided, but whatever, right? My priority is not to talk. So the helicopter could have heard it but didn't respond. See, we have to think about these things, right? You have to be very methodical in your thought process. Be very careful what kind of assumptions you're making, right? But ultimately, that will be my area of focus. I want to know what's up with this. And they were on a training mission as well. Is that relevant? Also, being a military aircraft, sometimes they do things a little bit unorthodox in terms of how they, the types of signals that they send out in terms of identifying who they are, where they are, and what they're doing. Commercial aircraft are a little bit more verbose as a consistent thing. This aircraft, being in a training mission, being a military aircraft, maybe they weren't fully broadcasting certain signals, and that could have added to the issue where, because aircraft have accident avoidance systems, and they are sort of cooperative, where The helicopter could be broadcasting a certain signal and participating in this system. The jet is also doing the same thing. So therefore, this system, separate from the pilots, would be able to track other aircraft using the same system that are in the area and also identify potential conflicts to where both the helicopter and the jet would get a notification that says, "Hey, there's an aircraft nearby, whatever it is." They even will notify you of avoidance procedures. Pull up, pull down, bank left or whatever. Was the helicopter participating in this? Did they have that mode activated? Right? Maybe they had it deactivated. So therefore, they weren't sending signals to the jet, so the jet didn't get any alert. And maybe they themselves didn't see the jet because their system was deactivated. So I want to know stuff like that. I want to know a lot of details about the helicopter. The reason I focus on the helicopter rather than the jet is because of, based on the information we know, I'm really concerned about them not responding, right? And also the way it looks, the helicopter kind of just flew into the jet from what I'm seeing. Why did they see the jet? Like, what was up with that? Why didn't they get an alert and then therefore move out of the way? Was there a response? Did we see? We're gonna look at the black box and see, was there a deviation just before the impact? We see the helicopter pulling up or increasing speed or decreasing speed or doing some kind of evasive maneuver, or do we just see them flying like nothing? Everything's fine, and then boom. So did the pilot like pass out? Right? Is that what happened? And even if one pilot passes out, the other pilot, like, why didn't they get notified? Why weren't they aware? Because again, even if they don't see it, even if air traffic control doesn't notify them, they have these systems that should alert them, right? What happened to the alert mechanisms? Did they function as they should, right? These are the kind of details. So I focus on air traffic control, focus on the helicopter, and then I would start eliminating things. So I would get me the helicopter black box, get me the air traffic control communication logs, get me the radar logs, right? I want to see at what point in time did each aircraft get on the radar and what alerts, if any, were given to the air traffic control operator. What was their response to these alerts, right? These are the kind of things I want to know. And one by one, I start eliminating things and I start focusing on air traffic control or the helicopter pilot, right? Maybe everything's checking out, then it's kind of like, okay, everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing. So was it equipment? So I want to look at the telemetry, right? I want to look at the black box and see were there any alert codes. So the aircraft themselves are going to have the equivalent like an application log, right? They're going to have these logs of everything that was happening, any kind of alerts. I'm sure there's low-level alerts, just like we talked about with ITIL, right? There's low-level alerts that's kind of like cautionary, informational, and then there's other alerts that are kind of like, hey, you should pay attention. And then there's others that's like, whoa, you better get this fixed right away type of thing. So I want to see the logs on both aircraft if that's the case. If everything else is checking out, the weather's good, the air traffic guy did what he's supposed to do, the helicopter guy did what he's supposed to do, what happened with the equipment? And that could be radio equipment or the actual aircraft. So protocols, we want to look at the protocols in terms of, did anyone deviate from the protocols? Both of these pilots have protocols they're supposed to follow in terms of flying the aircraft, in terms of how you approach an airport, how you land, you know what I mean? So they were flying VFR, which is visual flight rules, as opposed to IFR, which is information instrument flight rules. So basically, let's say you're in really bad weather. Obviously, you can't do visual flight rules. Mean you actually looking out and seeing things as opposed to you're looking at your gauges. In bad weather, that's how pilots can fly. They do IFR, so they're looking at their gauges. The gauges are telling them what's happening, how high the terrain is, all those kinds of things. So the helicopter, had certain responsibilities in terms of looking out. Were they following that? Did they violate any protocol? Were they at the wrong altitude? Were they told to do something that they didn't actually do? Maybe the helicopter was told, 10 minutes ago, or not 10, well, 5 minutes ago, to climb to 1,000 feet, and he never did it, right? So we want to investigate, was protocol followed? And everything is logs, 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 logs. We love logs, right? With fixed protocol logs, application logs, we love logs. Logs tell us the story, tell us the truth, tell us what happened and when. And from the details we get from the logs, we can figure out the why, right? At the time that we saw an alert in the scope, we also see that there was an alert in the helicopter, some kind of failure or whatever. And at the same time that the failure was happening, we noticed that that's when like we start putting together a picture. It's almost like in those movies where someone's trying to figure out a murder mystery and they have the board and they have like this guy and then they have the string going this way and the string going that way. It's kind of like that, right? Not quite as dramatic, but it's kind of the same type of concept. So that is the essence of the troubleshooting and how I would look to figure out exactly what happened. Beyond that, I don't think we covered the recovery failover necessarily. But again, we want to roll back. So maybe we identified that, in the context of fintech, there was a release last night and we determined that the release is the problem. That's the only thing that's changed between yesterday and today. It worked yesterday, it's not working today. So we've eliminated all of the factors. It's got to be the release. And even if we're not sure, it's the right thing to do based on where we're at and what we know, right? To not even try to do a rollback at this point, depending on what you figured out, that's kind of negligent, right? Because a release, you had a high risk of like breaking things, right? So do you want to do a rollback? Is it a restart thing? Do you want to restart the position server? Do you want to restart the trade server? Can you do it safely? Obviously, development, you want to get involved in that. So you want to try to restart things. And then once you restart things, you want to do a sanity check. So in the scope of the crash, shutting down the airport is shut down. At what point in time can we reopen, right? we did an investigation and we figured out that there was an issue with the air traffic control terminal. It has a bug, and the bug basically, any aircraft newer than 23 is using a new mode that this was not detecting because it switched to some incorrect mode, whatever it is. So basically, some aircraft were being seen and others were not. We've identified that it's the terminal, it's the software. So once we identify that, we swap out the terminal, give this guy a new terminal, and then we want to do sanity checks, right? We want to make sure that the issue that caused the crash is resolved, right? So we have some aircraft that are in the area that are newer than whatever. I can see them. We have some aircraft that are older than whatever. I can see them as well. So the problem, the specific problem that we were having before, we know it is resolved. We've confirmed that our strategy of replacing the terminal has fixed the issue, right? Because we did our sanity checks. So on the final thing, we do the post-mortem. All along the way, we should have been documenting our findings, right? If you're the primary person, you're the first person that got the first phone call, you got the alert from Genius or whatever software you're using, you should have been tracking what's happening, what you looked at, what was changed, who you spoke to, right? And from that, you can produce a post-mortem. What exactly happened when? At 6:38 p.m., Alpha departure. At 8:50 p.m., Bravo departure. At 8:59 p.m. and 30 seconds, notification sent from air traffic control to Jet Alpha, right? 30 seconds later, crash occurred. Through our investigation, we identified that the air traffic controller was not paying attention and missed an early alert from the notification system. And as a result, that resulted in a 2-minute delay in response. In that 2 minutes, the aircraft had plenty of time to be diverted and reached out to, we had multiple protocols that could have been initiated that could have avoided this. Because we can notify both aircraft at the same time in a way where, whatever it is, like we had solutions, but we couldn't implement them because the air traffic controller missed the initial alert. We did an assessment. We determined that the initial alert was sent via email, and that's problematic because when an air traffic controller is working multiple aircraft and you got different sounds that are going off, they're not going to be checking their emails, right? So we've determined there's a flaw in our alert system. Sending an email alert, even for a soft alert, is not appropriate because we see what happens here. So we've made a modification. We've introduced an audio alert for this soft level alert that this guy should have responded to. It's not as loud as the other sounds. It's not as abrupt as the other sounds. It's softer. It's appropriate to its alert level. It's just an advisory type thing, but it has a sound. So if the air traffic controller is working on multiple things, he's distracted, he's focusing on different things, he still hears that, a light sound bell or whatever. So increasing the probability of them recognizing this. So something like this could not happen. In addition, we found that the helicopter did not have their accident avoidance, system activated. And that's a result of something they do in training flights. The military has advised us that they will no longer be doing that. They have now banned the deactivation of that system in the future. So in the future, something like this also would be avoided because with the new military protocol, the alert systems would have helped, right? Because the helicopter would have gotten the alert tone, the jet would have gotten the alert tone separate from air traffic control. So even if air traffic control didn't recognize that system being on, alerts both of the pilots, and they could have avoided each other because of that. So with these two changes, we feel fairly confident that we have resolved this issue and prevented it. No system is perfect, obviously, but the probability of this happening again, extremely low. And bottom line is, we have a high level of confidence that this is no longer something that has a reasonable probability of reoccurring. So that is the summary of your postmortem report. And that is your full ITIL process. Notice that one of the key details here is staying calm, right? You don't want to panic and freak out and going crazy. You want to stick to your training, right? There's a protocol that you should follow, that you should be aware of, who to notify, when to notify them, right? Based on the priority level. Right? What's the incident level? How severe of this issue is? Who are you notifying? I'm notifying my manager as well as the manager of the desk, right? I'm notifying the senior level person of the relevant system, right? So seems to be a database issue. The senior DBA is notified because this is a severe issue. High level business people are notified. Severe issue. I notified my manager, but I also notified whatever the protocols are, right? Sending out the notifications, making sure people are aware, telling people to route away, right? What are the alternatives? What's the backup? What's the failover? This system is down, but business must continue. So we need to find an alternative. This system has failed, so we're not going to use this system, right? What's the process to switch from this system to that system? What's the process to restarting the server that needs to restart? What's the process to rolling back the changes from last night that we've determined has caused the issue, right? So key details, stay calm, document, always consider the risk level. What's the impact to the firm? What's the potential cost or potential losses to the firm? And you're going to respond appropriately. Now, should be easier because of following certain protocols in terms of based on the incident level, right, the severity level that you assign, you would have a protocol to follow, right? So you don't have to even think about who should I notify. It's kind of like, hey, your protocol is for all whatever your highest level is. Anything at that level, you must notify this person, that person, that person. You don't have to even think about it, right? You have a procedure, you have a handbook that you follow, or run book, whatever it is you call, right? That tells you these level problems, this is who you notify. Obviously, you should also use your judgment as well, right? You don't want to be stuck with just, whatever is written there. You should have the expertise level and understand your systems, understand the implications, to use your judgment as well. Maybe the information in your manual is missing something, right? It didn't mention what to do in this particular case, right? Use your judgment. A key thing, if it's a big issue, notify your manager, right? You may not know what to do, but your manager will. And if your manager doesn't know what to do, your manager knows who to talk to, right? So they can get somebody involved to help you to figure out what to do, what's the appropriate response, who to reach out to. Because maybe you reach out to the wrong person, you're not getting anywhere. Your manager says, hey man, that's not the right person. You need to talk to this person because that's the relevant system. But stay calm, document everything, always consider the risk, who's involved, who does this affect, right? So therefore, who needs to be notified. And don't just be all over the place. Stay calm, right? Look at what you know and what you don't know. You have the concentric circles, right? What you know and what you don't know. And then in the middle, that's where you're kind of, getting down to, okay, it could be these things. Okay, it's not that, it's not this, it's not that, it's not this, it's not that, it's not this, it's not that. Okay, I'm down to 3 things. It's gotta be one of these 3 things. Hey guys, this is what I found out so far. I think it's gotta be something with the database or something with this, because in the logs I see this happening at this time, and at the same time something's happening in the other system, and that's what the logs indicate. You know what I mean? So, and then you collaborate, you got your bridge call, everyone's involved, and you all work together. Relax, you'll figure it out, and you'll get through it. No need to get all stressed out. You'll figure it out one way or another, and you're not alone, right? You're part of a team. It's not all on you. You may have a lot of responsibilities, but you're not alone. You're working on a team. Work together, get it done, resolve it, make sure it doesn't happen again, and don't stress too much. Something really bad happens. I know it's can be a little scary. Your boss talking to you and you get a little talk. Hey, you should have done whatever. Don't let that bring you down. We all make mistakes. Own up to your mistakes. Make sure you learn from your mistakes and be better next time, right? If you don't learn from your mistakes and you keep making mistakes, then that's the problem. But simply making a mistake in itself is not a problem, because I should say it's not a problem. But I mean, don't let that be like, oh goodness, we all make mistakes, right? Try your best to avoid them, obviously, because the stakes are very high. But when they do, and they will, just take it, have some perspective in terms of understanding that we all make mistakes. You're not the only one who's made whatever mistake you made, and you're not going to be the last one, right? So focus just on resolving the issue and preventing it from happening again. That should be your area of focus. Resolving the issue and making sure it doesn't happen again, right? Get through the day, when you get home, relax, listen to some classical music or whatever it is, whatever works for you. Anyway, this is the FinTech Blueprint, your gateway to your career in financial technology industry. If you enjoyed this video, you know what to do. Click on the like button, subscribe, smash that bell, and until next time, this is Carlisle.